Today's guest on the Winning Teams podcast is Jim Wetrich. Now, Jim is the founder and CEO of the Wetrich Group of companies. He's has a fantastic career in the corporate world as a leader in businesses, and he's worked in over 3 continents and built different businesses and developed leaders. He's also the author of a recent book called Stifled, Where Leaders Go Wrong. And as said, somebody with the sort of experience and expertise that Jim has over the years, he is certainly well worth listening to. So we dig into lots of things about the big challenges that leaders have in today's organizations, and also, in terms of actually creating and building future leaders. So I really encourage you to sit back and listen to Jim. We'd also love you to give us a review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you're listening to your podcast, because that's how we get to more people. But in the meantime, sit back and listen to the very interesting, very experienced, and the giver of much wisdom, Jim Wetrich. Jim, thank you so much indeed for being a guest on the Winning Teams podcast. It's a great honor to have you here.
It's a great delight and a great honor as well, John, to be with you and your listeners today. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, I know that they will enjoy this because you bring a ton of experience that will be really valuable to them. Maybe just to give a bit of context, because your recent book that you brought out, Stifled, Where Good Leaders Go Wrong, and we can get into that. I like the title.
Thank you.
Maybe before that, maybe just to give a bit of context, share your background so that people understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, sure, John. Thank you very much. I've been working now for over 40 years. I started in the hospital administration business and worked in hospitals in the U.S. and then moved to Abbott Laboratories based in Chicago, where I had a wonderful 11-year run in marketing, both domestically as well as I mentioned to you recently in Europe. I ran the 5 large countries of Europe from a marketing standpoint. And then left Abbott to set up my own consulting business because I had a very strong entrepreneurial itch to go see if I could, set up my own business, and ran that for 6 years. And then in 2006, jumped back into the medical device world, worked for a Swedish-based healthcare company and ran the US and Latin America for them. They were in the burn market, the surgical glove market, and also the wound market, people with bad wounds. Left that company after a wonderful run in 2014 and came back and jump-started my consulting business. And for the last couple of years, I've been focusing on leadership development, developing managers, developing leaders, and also doing some executive and professional coaching.
Yeah, well, it's a ton of experience. Let's talk about your book, Stifled, Where Good Leaders Go Wrong. Maybe just explain the title and why you picked that particular title, and where do they go wrong? I can guess some, but just I've been sitting your take.
John, I think it's a really apropos word for what has been going on for a long time, particularly in quote corporate America. When I started in my career as an employee, you really didn't have much of a voice. Your boss sort of owned you, and you did what you were told, and you didn't talk back, and you worked when you were supposed to work. And obviously, that model and the command and control model has completely been eliminated for the most part. We're doing so many things still, John, that just don't make any sense. And there's been all kinds of information and data and research come out, but some of these bad habits continue. The annual performance review, there's still companies that are just spending, the entire month of January, the entire month of February, depending upon their fiscal year, grinding out these annual reviews that are they've been shown to be one of the greatest demotivators and sources of disengagement of anything they do, but we still do it. And it's so many things like that, meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, and the data about the lack of productivity in meetings is just staggering. But we continue not to be focused and practical and pragmatic about meetings, when we meet, how long the meetings are. So it's just a few of the examples I give in the book about how we're continuing to stifle employees in our business.
And isn't it extraordinary? I mean, I was smiling when you were saying about the annual reviews, because I get myself into trouble with HR departments, because I'm always saying they actually do everything except what they're meant to do.
Correct.
And they become a war, they become a competitive environment, they become a win-lose situation, and they achieve nothing, and it always ends up as a row. So I just think that they're a complete waste of time. But when you're talking about that, and I can identify with all the things that you're saying, the part that fascinates me is that, corporate America, corporate world, not just in America, corporate world is filled with bright people, right? Why don't we actually call out some of these glaring errors and do something about it, because we're just continuing to make the same mistakes?
I think it's a great question, John. I think part of it is there's still a sort of hierarchy. There's still a bureaucracy. There's still a pecking order. And unless some of these things won't start at the top, people just aren't willing at lower levels to stick their neck out and call into question things that have been, in process for a very long period of time. And that's why I think it's so important for the leaders, the C-level executives of these companies, to make these changes. I've read any number of books, including Jeff Immelt's book called Hot Seat, of how he really messed up at GE, and he talks about a number of things he did improperly, and he spent a lot of time in HR. But I think part of it is too, John, we don't necessarily have the strongest leaders in some of these positions that we need to have. And there's a number of CEOs that, want the HR department to be subservient to him or her and not really be a driver of cultural change. And I think that's where, in one case where companies get into trouble.
Yeah. And when you look at leaders, I mean, because I do think that, I think it's a very interesting time in the life of leaders right now. I mean, even, the experience of going, COVID happening, how we all adjusted. And you'd have to say, when you look at the way businesses adjusted, it was really good. It was speedy. It got into execution, and and yes, there were some hiccups along the way, but overall, it was pretty impressive. I do think there'll be some things in terms of the hours of working and how people are working as an issue. But I'm just curious, when you're talking about that, Jim, and the experience that you've got and the work you're doing with company, what do you see as being the big challenges for leaders today that might even be somewhat different to the challenges even 10 years ago?
Yeah, well, I think you talked a little bit about them, John. Clearly, the change in how we're going to work, where we're going to work, how often we're going to do the work we're doing. I think we've all learned. I particularly learned something that I thought wasn't really possible, which is we could have so much productivity for such a sustainable period of time with people outside of the office, right? Because I wouldn't have thought it was possible. Now, having said that, the flip is the reverse. How do we build engagement with these people, many of whom legitimately can do a job that doesn't require them to come into an office? So one of the things that I heard recently is someone was talking about part of what's happening is everything now, because it's virtual, is transactional. I get on calls every hour, every half an hour, all day long, and we're talking about business, about sales, about profits, about market share, about price, whatever it is. And we've lost the little water cooler, coffee shop, cafeteria, walking between buildings, walking between floors, all the non-business related conversations, right? Everything's transactional now. So part of what we have to do as leaders is stop and think about, how do I get back into some of that missed opportunity for interaction? I suggest leaders call their people, like, hey, John, I'm not calling about work. I just want to take your pulse, 15 minutes. I just want to know how you're doing right now. how are you doing? How's your family doing? I just want to check in. And I think part of that is we're not doing that because we're not providing for time to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the other part of it is that, and there's an element in it, is that when you look at the generation that's come into the workforce over the last number of years, they're very much that kind of digitally enabled, generation, and yet very often the management haven't come from the same place. So and they perhaps have been, in their early days, like you and I would command and control. I said, you turned up, you did your work, you did what you were told, right? Very different nowadays. But some of those managers are now managing people that have got a very different perspective on view. Just different doesn't make it right or wrong, but it's just different view on what work should look like. How do we bridge that gap between those generations?
Well, I think part of it is feedback, and there's lots of companies that have now moved to much more dynamic, real-time type feedback. And we have to have a culture where psychological safety is in place, where these younger workers can speak up. I talk about in the book, my younger son, he's a millennial. He's in his early 30s. He's a finance person, and he worked in investment banking, and his 40-something-year-old boss had no idea how to manage him. And part of what we need to do, John, is nobody's managing the managers, right? If I'm working for you and you're my manager and I'm managing a team, at the end of the year, we'd sit down. Hey, how are my numbers? Did I hit my budget? Did I hit my sales? Did I hit my profits? You have generally no bloody idea on how I'm treating my people. Yeah. And whether or not it's good or bad, because I don't go and watch you interact with your team. And that's where some of the huge gaps are. We're not managing the managers. And we just have to do that, particularly with what you just said with this new generation.
Yeah. And I mean, because you have led teams, in 3 different continents, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Over that period of time. When you look back at that time of lead, because then you've led different cultures, different environments, different economic times, good, bad, and different, all of those. When you look back on that, if you were to try and pick your top 3 learnings, what would they be?
Yeah, I think one of them, John, is transparency. And I talk about this in the book. I think companies are not doing what they can do to be transparent. And look, we've all been in situations where the companies come out and said, we're going to do this way. And you have to do this in order to get promoted. You have to take this job and this job and this job. And then a month later, somebody gets promoted who wasn't, didn't go through those hurdles. And my point here is, and I write about this in the book, it's okay to have exceptions to your rules and your policies. Just state up front, this isn't black or white. This is the intended path. It may deviate. We may deviate from it, but this is what our general guidelines are. But instead, we get very binary, like you have to do this to get from here to there. And then things change. So transparency is really, really, really critical. I also think, John, and it pains me as a person to see the continued lack of integrity in so many companies. Even today, these huge companies making these enormous mistakes, setting up phony accounts, setting up phony software to get around pollution tests. I mean, it shocks me. And I think the third thing is one of the things it's hard to learn as a manager is to let people do the work the way they want to do it, right? We want to, as a manager, because we're comfortable with the way we work, we want to have our subordinates work and do the project the way we would do it. And what I try to get my managers to understand is give them guidance, but step back, let them do the work the way they do it. And what I've found, John, in most of my career, when I asked people to do things, they did it far better than I ever would have done it.
Yeah. Tapping into the, if you like, the strap line where good leaders go wrong.
Yeah.
What's your advice to them so that good leaders go right?
Yeah, good question, John. With the honesty and apparent conflict of interest in mind, I do believe so many people can benefit from coaching. I really do believe that. And there are so many people that have been very successful that have had long-term coaches. And it's something you can provide, I know, and it's an interest of yours. So I think that's really important. The second thing is admitting what you do not know. One of the things that shocked me about reading Jeff Immelt's book about his time at GE is, and he said it in the book and he said it in interviews about the book, I wish I'd said I don't know more often. Too many senior executives feel like they have to have the answers. And in today's world, with everything so technical, it's just not possible. And it's critical that you know what you don't know. It's just so important.
Yeah. One of the things that I was reading about you is that you and I presume one of the healthcare businesses that you had huge growth in revenue and EBITDA.
Yeah.
But you also had, which was highly unusual, an employee satisfaction rate of 95%, which is, I mean, a mile above what the average would be.
Yeah.
What did you do to actually ensure that you had the staff satisfaction rate at such a high level? What did you do to get it there, and what did you do to keep it there?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually put a lot of things in place, but one of the keys in that experience was we just had a phenomenal training department, and we were training people on all kinds of things, whether it was selling, whether it was sales management, whether it was leadership development. Even though we were a small company, John, and globally we were only $1.5 billion, the training department we had and the training we were doing at that company, I would have put up against any big medical device company, whether it was 3M, Abbott Laboratories, Johnson & Johnson, you name it. So training was one thing. The second thing is we put a very lucrative financial plan in process for the people out in the field. Some of the mistakes that so many executives make, and I've seen it in all different sizes of companies, people think that salespeople should only make so much. You know, whatever that so much is, whether it's 150,000 or 200,000, our salespeople shouldn't make more than that. They shouldn't be. Well, in our case, we were selling products that had very nice margins. And the first thing I did when I got in that place is uncap the commission plan. Once you hit your quota, we're going to pay you a very lucrative percentage of everything you sell on top of that, because it's a win-win. Yeah. And we had so many people making a lot of money, and they got motivated, right? It was powerful. And also leadership, John, we brought in some really fabulous outside talent to help us, you know, right? And getting the right people in the right place is so critical. Yeah.
Just when you talk about leadership there, what's your definition of good leadership?
My definition is that, and I said this to the people at Mundaka when I was about to leave, I said, the only aspiration I have as a leader leading this organization is that you and everybody in the organization has grown and developed in the time I've been in charge of this organization. It's not about the sales. It's not about the margin. It's not about the profits, the market share. The only thing I can do, particularly in a smaller company like that, was, because I can't offer you a career because there's only a few VPs, right? I can't offer. The only thing I can do is make sure we put programs and plans in place so that you grow as an individual and you grow as a person during my time.
Well, quite a legacy to leave. In terms of when we look at because the challenge that organizations have, and that, well, gosh, indeed, the world has, in a sense, is about, you know, growing future leaders.
Yeah.
When you're looking at organizations, when you're talking to organizations, and, you know, everyone's going to say, yes, we want to develop future leaders. What do you think are the things that they really must do in order to make that happen, rather than just having it as a one-liner?
Well, I think there's a couple things, John, is trying to get any kind of feedback that they might be able to have to help that person identify where there's opportunities and gaps. When there's all kinds, as you know, there's all kinds of assessment tools out there that companies can use to help identify where there may be gaps and strengths. So I think that's really important. Trying to figure out what is important to the company? What does the company stand for? And how do we make sure we inculcate that into our management processes, right? If we believe in psychological safety, what are we doing to manage and monitor a psychologically safe environment where people can speak up and not, fear of getting their career derailed or their, head chopped off? So I think that's really important. The other thing is helping people figure out what their passion is, John. I'll never forget at one of the early sales meetings, I talked about passion, and a sales rep came up to me and said, Jim, I don't want to be a sales rep. My passion is teaching. I said, you know what? That's absolutely fabulous. I said, don't quit your job. I said, keep on doing it. Go find a teaching job. And about 9 months later, he said, Jim, I found my teaching job and I'm going to move on. And I said, that's absolutely fabulous. You found your passion. And helping people find their passion, I think, is so critical, because, in some of your brief, previous podcasts and things, right? Figuring out what my passion is and what I stand for is so important to success in life.
Absolutely. Jim, we could go on because it's a fascinating subject, and you bring a kind of a well of experience that is phenomenal. And I think that to anybody listening right now who is either in a leadership role or aspiring to a leadership role, I'd highly recommend that they go and get your book Stifled, Where Good Leaders Go Wrong, because it's really how-to actually get it right. But before we wrap up, 2 questions I ask everybody. One is a book other than your own that you've read that's had an impact upon you. What's the book and what was the impact?
Yeah, so it's a great question, John. And I talk about this in the book. Warren Bennis, who has written extensively, he's passed away now, but extensively on the notion of leadership. One of his best leadership books published in 1989 is called On Becoming a Leader by Warren Bennis. And that's what got me into studying and focusing and learning about leadership, Warren's book. And I still highly recommend it. It's there's some absolutely fabulous parts of that book. Yeah.
Great writer. Fantastic.
Great writer. Fantastic.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, I love that book. Secondly, daily rituals, if you have them and you're happy to share them, and what they do for you.
I think, John, finding a few moments of just absolute downtime. And sometimes I use different apps to meditate. Sometimes it's just quiet time, but finding your own inner peace, even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes every day, to just reflect and just, unwind and just be within yourself, I think is so important today.
Yeah, quieten the noise.
Right.
Which is the important thing to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Jim, thank you so much for being a guest. It's been a real honor to have you here, and it's been fantastic to chat with you. I wish you continued success with the business and also with your book Stifled.
Thank you, John. It's been an honor to be here.
Thanks, Jim. Take care.
You bet.